Welcome back to Askewed Reviews, and today we are continuing the Friday the 13th series with the 1989 film Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Here is your trivia question for today. What is the name of the cruise ship? The answer will be at the end of this video. So our film starts off 1 year later after the events of the last movie. We have a boat that's out on Crystal Lake, and they decide to drop anchor, which unfortunately catches a power line. And that power line gets dragged over to Jason's body and electrocutes him back into life once again. Jason, of course, climbs aboard and kills both of the passengers. He then, for some reason, stays aboard the boat as it begins to move its way out towards sea. He then, of course, decides to hitch a ride on a cruise ship that the boat is passing by. The cruise ship ends up being perfect for Jason as it's filled with a bunch of high school graduates. There are, of course, a few chaperones on board, and we get to meet our main character, Rennie, along with her dog, Toby, that is there for some reason. This is also the point where we get to meet Sean, who is not only Rennie's boyfriend, but also the son of the admiral of the ship, and apparently our second main character. Now, with so many people trapped in one place, you know Jason is just gonna go to town and have fun doing it. So will our main characters of Rennie and Sean be able to stop Jason from killing everyone, at least before they can get to New York City? The director and writer for this film is Rob Heaton. Prior to the film, Heaton had actually worked as a writer for the TV show MacGyver. Paramount then gave him an opportunity to be a writer for the television series Friday the 13th, which has no connection to the movies whatsoever. So he agreed to it only if he could also direct. So they allowed him to direct and write 2 of the episodes, which actually apparently impressed them. So they then offered him the job of being the writer and director for this film. He agreed, but once again had a stipulation. His stipulation was that this time he could bring Jason out of Crystal Lake, and that's why it's Jason Takes Manhattan. Unfortunately, Heaton's film takes place mainly on the cruise ship. Now, that wasn't his original plan. There are some sequences in New York, but there were going to be originally a lot more. For instance, he had plans to use scenes at Madison Square Garden, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Statue of Liberty, and even the Empire State Building, but the budget did not allow for those scenes to be created. Speaking of the budget, even though some scenes are filmed in New York, most of the scenes are actually done in Vancouver because it saved money. This is also why the cast jokingly calls the movie Jason Takes Vancouver due to the amount of scenes that were filmed there. Now, before any talks of New York and cruises came about, they did try to talk Lar Park Lincoln into reprising her role of Tina, but she unfortunately wanted much more money than they were willing to be able to take out of the budget. So they did a rewrite, and this is what we have now. There also was one more attempt to try to make a Freddy and Jason movie, but once again, both of the studios couldn't come to an agreement. What's funny about this is after the disappointing box office of this film, Paramount actually sold the rights to New Line Cinema. This is another one of the Friday the 13th movies that had a fake working title that was also a David Bowie song. This one was called Ashes to Ashes. The movie came out in 1989, and for the second year in a row, Jason, Freddy, and Michael Myers would all have sequel films. Prior to the film releasing, Kane Hodder would actually appear as Jason on the Arsenio Hall show, and he did the entire interview without speaking. Also, when speaking of advertising, we can't forget to talk about the fact that Batman from 1989 was just starting its promotions when they started filming in New York, and that's why you can see the giant logo in the background. In the subway, there's a little bit of graffiti that says Jason Lives. Most of the cast actually had a movie marathon before starting filming, and they watched parts 1 through 7 in preparation. Jensen Daggett played Rennie Wickham, but apparently both Pamela Anderson and Elizabeth Berkley were up for the role. The man that Jason would throw across the diner into the mirror was Ken Kersinger, who would actually go on to play Jason in the movie Freddy vs. Jason. The waitress in the New York diner is played by Peggy Heaton, who happens to be director Rob Heaton's sister. Toby the dog is actually named after a dog that Heaton once had. Kane Hodder came back to reprise his role as Jason Voorhees. Since Hodder was wearing so much padding, he actually told Vincent Craig Dupree, who played Julius, to actually punch him in the scene. Also, apparently Vincent punched him 59 times. During the scene where Jason breaks through the porthole and pulls Rennie towards him, Jensen Daggett is actually terrified, and that's mainly due to the fact that she noticed something that Kane Hodder didn't. As he was pulling her towards him, there was a big piece of sharpened glass that didn't fall off with the rest of them, and he was pulling her directly towards it. Just as a warning, this next fact is going to be pretty gross. Kane Hodder one day drank a lot of pitchers of water. Now, the reason he did this is there's a sequence where Jason is vomiting up water. So, on cue, Kane Hodder actually threw up all of that water, and that was not a special effect. The body count for this film is 19. You have Jim, who gets a spear gun to the gut, Susie, who gets a spear to the chest, JJ, who gets her head caved in with her own guitar, the boxer, who gets sauna rocks plunged into his chest, Tamara, who gets mirror shards stabbed into her back, the chief engineer, who gets a harpoon into the back, the admiral, who gets his throat slit, Eva, who gets strangled to death, Wayne, who gets electrocuted by the control board, Miles, who gets thrown onto and impaled by the ship's radio antenna, the deckhand, who gets an axe to the spine, Holmes, who gets a drug-filled syringe stabbed through his back and pierced through his chest, Jojo, who gets his head slammed into a pipe, Julius, who gets decapitated in one single punch, the police officer, who gets dragged off and assumedly gets killed, Colleen, who gets blown up in a car explosion, Charles, who thankfully gets drowned in a barrel of sewage, the diner cook, who gets thrown against a wall, but come on, he probably died because this is the same person that punched someone's head off a little bit ago, and the sanitation engineer, whose head was bashed in with a wrench. Now, there might technically be more deaths, but we don't exactly know what the actual outcome was for all of the other students that were on the cruise. So when it comes to Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, this unfortunately is another one of my least favorite films in the series, which is sad because once again it has Kane Hodder, who is one of my favorite Jasons, and in fact I did enjoy Jason in the movie, but that's pretty much all I enjoyed. So unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to give this one a 2 out of 5. Now, as for the trivia question from the beginning of this episode, what is the name of the cruise ship? The ship is called the Lazarus, which is very appropriate, being the fact that both Jason and the biblical character of that name both came back from the dead. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews, and if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.